January 17th, 1943. The North Sea stretches like a dark, icy mirror beneath the battered bomber. Engines roar, but unevenly. One sputters, coughing black smoke into the gray sky. Wind tears at the fuselage, whipping through holes ripped by enemy fire. Inside the cockpit, frost bites the fingertips of the pilot, the co-pilot's knuckles white as they grip the controls. A flash of flak explodes nearby, shredding clouds and tearing another jagged hole in the plane's tail. The aircraft shudders violently. The navigator checks coordinates, his voice barely audible over the wind. We're still on course, just barely. Bomb bays rumble, empty, a silent testament to a mission half complete. In the rear, gunners scan the sky, eyes straining through cracked plexiglass. Smoke curls from the damaged fuselage, mingling with the bitter tang of fear. Every heartbeat echoes in the cavernous metal cabin. Survival seems impossible. Yet, somehow, the bomber refuses to fall. Against all reason, against every expectation, it limps forward, a wounded giant clawing its way home. The question hangs in the frozen air. Can it really make it back without a tail? By early 1943, the skies over Europe were a battlefield like no other. The Allies had committed to a strategy of daylight precision bombing, a gamble aimed at crippling Nazi Germany's industrial heart without the cover of night. At the center of this strategy stood the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, a heavy bomber designed not just to carry tons of explosives, but to endure the storm of anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters. The Flying Fortress was born from necessity. In 1935, the United States Army Air Corps had demanded a bomber capable of flying long distances, carrying heavy payloads, and surviving in hostile airspace. Boeing's engineers delivered a machine of rugged construction, a four-engine aircraft with redundant systems, self-sealing fuel tanks, and multiple defensive gun positions. Its moniker, Flying Fortress, was no exaggeration. Even in the early years of the war, stories of crippled B-17s returning home, battered but intact, began circulating among airmen and engineers alike. By January 1943, the United States had deployed several bomber groups across England. These formations were tasked with hitting factories, airfields, and transportation hubs deep inside Germany. The missions were calculated with precision, yet fraught with danger. Each sortie faced the deadly combination of flak bursts, shells fired from the ground that could shred wings and puncture fuselages, and Luftwaffe interceptors trained to exploit any weakness in formation flying. Loss rates were severe. One mission over Bremen in 1942 saw nearly 20% of the bombers fail to return. Crews aboard these aircraft were young, often barely out of training, but seasoned quickly by necessity. Pilots learned to gauge the aircraft's behavior under extreme stress. A wing that quivered after flak, an engine sputtering and refusing to respond, controls that refused to follow commands. Bombardiers studied the intricate mechanics of northern bomb sites, mastering calculations of wind, speed, and altitude that could make the difference between hitting a factory and wasting a payload on empty fields. Engineers and mechanics rode along on long missions, monitoring engines, patching leaks, and improvising repairs when metal and fire threatened to tear the bomber apart. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, had perfected anti-bomber tactics. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s prowled the skies, exploiting gaps in formations and aiming for engines or tails, the structural vulnerabilities that could send a flying fortress spiraling from the heavens. German flak units, stationed around key industrial cities, fired shells timed to explode at specific altitudes, creating lethal clouds of shrapnel. Each bomber's flight path was a gauntlet, a dance with death that required not just courage but technical skill, instinct, and sometimes sheer luck. Despite these dangers, the B-17's design offered hope. Its robust A-frame allowed crews to absorb damage unimaginable for other aircraft of the era. Redundant hydraulic and electrical systems meant that even when one or two components failed, others could keep the plane aloft. Reports from early missions detailed bombers returning with gaping holes, destroyed control surfaces, and shattered gun turrets, yet still completing their flight and landing safely. This resilience inspired confidence, but it also bred a subtle recklessness. Aircrews tested the limits of what the aircraft could endure, flying into flak fields or diving through fighter formations with grim determination. The war in the air was not just a test of machines, it was a test of human endurance. A bomber crew of 10 or 12 men worked in confined, freezing spaces, often under direct fire, with little margin for error. The cockpit might reach temperatures near zero, while the tail gunners endured frostbite and deafening gunfire. Sleep, warmth, and comfort were luxuries denied by the roar of engines and the constant threat of death. Yet within this environment, bonds formed that were as critical to survival as any mechanical innovation. Trust between pilot and co-pilot, gunners and navigators, defined the thin line between catastrophe and return. It was against this backdrop, engineering ingenuity, deadly enemy tactics, and relentless human determination, that the event of January 17, 1943, would unfold. A mission intended as routine would become legendary, not for its strategic impact, but for a singular testament to resilience. A B-17 flying fortress, stripped of its tail, defying the laws of physics, enemy fire, and death itself. From the frozen heights over the North Sea to the sprawling factories of Germany, every mile of that mission would test the aircraft and its crew beyond known limits, revealing lessons in survival, courage, and the raw power of engineering under pressure. Bomber missions in 1943 were exercises in precision, coordination, and sheer nerve. Crews awoke before dawn, boarding their aircraft under the pale light of English winter skies. Engines were started carefully, the vibration reverberating through the fuselage, a reminder that every component could fail at the worst possible moment. Briefings outlined targets, anticipated enemy defenses, weather conditions, and formation patterns. Yet even the most meticulous planning could not guarantee survival. Formation flying was essential. Bombers flew in tight, protective boxes, allowing gunners to cover one another against Luftwaffe attacks. Every aircraft had multiple machine gun positions: nose, tail, dorsal, ventral, and waist. Gunners became acutely aware that a single lapse in vigilance could mean destruction for the plane beside them. The deadly combination of enemy fighters and anti-aircraft artillery made each mission a gauntlet. Flak, often exploding at thousands of feet below, sent fragments tearing through fuselages. Engines could be crippled in a single burst, hydraulic lines severed in an instant. Many bombers never made it home. Within this perilous environment, crew roles were rigidly defined, yet flexibility was essential. Pilots relied on co-pilots for split-second decision-making when instruments failed. Bombardiers became navigators in emergencies, plotting courses when radios went silent or wind conditions shifted unexpectedly. Flight engineers monitored engine temperatures, oil pressure, and fuel flow, patching minor issues in mid-air, often crawling through cramped spaces while the aircraft shuddered under fire. The tail gunner, positioned at the far rear, faced the most isolated and dangerous post, exposed to freezing winds and enemy fire. Every crew member depended on the others, and trust was not optional, it was survival. The B-17 itself was a marvel of resilience. It could absorb damage that would destroy lesser aircraft. Torn wings, shredded fuselages, and even compromised tail sections could be partially compensated for with careful handling. Pilots learned to feel the aircraft, sensing subtle changes in lift, drag, and balance. Yet, no training fully prepared them for the catastrophic loss of a tail, the stabilizing structure that controlled pitch and yaw. Such damage was considered almost universally fatal. The missions were long, often lasting 8 hours or more, with fuel reserves stretched to the limit. Crews faced not just the physical toll of cold, vibration, and exhaustion, but also the psychological strain of constant danger. Bomb sites required immense concentration, and every flak burst or enemy aircraft could disrupt hours of careful calculation. Yet despite the fear, crews found moments of camaraderie, humor, and shared resolve, tiny anchors in a storm of chaos. For the Luftwaffe, downing bombers was both a tactical necessity and a morale booster. German pilots developed intricate interception tactics, using speed, altitude, and surprise to exploit weaknesses in formations. Anti-aircraft batteries, or flak, were strategically placed to protect industrial hubs and transport networks. A single burst could sever control cables, puncture fuel tanks, or collapse landing gear. Even minor damage could cascade into disaster over the next hundreds of miles. Given these circumstances, every flight became a contest not only of skill but of endurance, judgment, and luck. Crippled bombers that limped home were celebrated as miracles. Their stories spread among squadrons, inspiring both awe and determination. The combination of engineering ingenuity, human courage, and a measure of fortune could tip the balance between life and death. It was into this high-stakes environment that the fateful mission of January 17, 1943, would occur. The crew, like countless others, faced the deadly intersection of mechanical vulnerability, enemy firepower, and the unforgiving North Sea. Every element, the aircraft, the men, the planning, and the adversary, would converge to test the limits of possibility. The extraordinary nature of the B-17 Flying Fortress, coupled with the relentless threat of flak and fighters, sets the stage for examining the event from multiple angles. Human courage, technological innovation, tactical mastery, leadership, and the stark reality of war. These perspectives will illuminate not just what happened, but why this bomber's survival remains legendary. For the crew aboard a B-17, the human element was as crucial as the machine itself. Pilots, co-pilots, bombardiers, gunners, and engineers lived in constant proximity, confined within the metal hull, exposed to freezing winds and deafening gunfire. Each man relied not just on training, but on instinct and trust. The pilot, often responsible for split-second decisions that could mean life or death, had to manage not only the aircraft but the morale of his crew. On missions like January 17, 1943, fear was omnipresent. Every flak burst that rattled the fuselage was a reminder of mortality. Yet, crews learned to channel fear into focus. Gunners scanned the skies with unblinking eyes, shouting alerts for enemy fighters. Bombardiers calculated precise bomb runs while smoke and alarms filled the cockpit. Even minor injuries could complicate survival, yet men continued to perform their roles with grim determination. The human resilience displayed during such missions became legendary. Stories of crew members manually stabilizing damaged controls, improvising repairs mid-flight, or navigating with partial instruments highlight not just technical skill, but the strength of human will. In the case of a bomber losing its tail, every heartbeat mattered, each crew member's actions directly influencing whether the aircraft could remain aloft. The B-17 was designed for survival. Its four-engine configuration, reinforced fuselage, and multiple defensive gun positions made it one of the most resilient bombers of World War II. Redundant systems ensured that even when engines failed or control surfaces were damaged, the aircraft could often be flown home. Engineers had anticipated combat damage, incorporating features such as self-sealing fuel tanks to prevent fires and armor plating in critical areas. Yet the loss of a tail section challenged even the most robust engineering. The vertical stabilizer and rudder provided essential control over yaw, while the horizontal stabilizers maintained pitch. Without them, a bomber was nearly uncontrollable. That a B-17 could fly, maneuver, and even land under such conditions is a testament to both design foresight and the improvisational skill of its crew. The Flying Fortress also benefited from its ability to maintain lift even under extreme structural compromise. The wing design, combined with the power of four engines, allowed the aircraft to fight the air rather than succumb to gravity. This interplay of mechanical resilience and human ingenuity created the possibility of miracles, such as returning home with catastrophic damage. German air defenses posed a constant, deadly threat. The Luftwaffe employed a combination of fighter aircraft and flak batteries to intercept Allied bombers. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Fw-190s relied on speed and surprise, attacking weak points in bomber formations and focusing on engines or tails to maximize damage. Meanwhile, anti-aircraft artillery exploded in calculated bursts, showering the sky with lethal fragments. Pilots had to anticipate every maneuver, every angle of attack. Formation integrity was critical. Stragglers or isolated bombers were easy prey. Yet even well-flown formations could be pierced by coordinated attacks. The psychological weight of facing a coordinated Luftwaffe strike, combined with the knowledge that one lucky burst could be fatal, intensified the tension aboard each aircraft. In the case of a bomber losing its tail, enemy presence compounded the danger. A crippled aircraft was vulnerable not only to aerodynamic failure, but to opportunistic fighter attacks. Every decision, from altitude adjustments to evasive maneuvers, was a delicate balance between survival and exposure. Mission planning and leadership were decisive factors in survival. Squadron commanders analyzed intelligence reports, weather conditions, and enemy dispositions to design bombing runs that minimized risk while achieving strategic objectives. Within the aircraft, pilots acted as leaders, interpreting real-time damage reports and making critical adjustments. During extreme emergencies, such as tail loss, the role of leadership became even more crucial. The pilot had to maintain composure, communicate clearly, and coordinate the crew's efforts. Bombardiers might take over navigation. Engineers monitored compromised systems. Gunners stayed alert for enemy fighters. A single misjudgment could cascade into catastrophe. Effective leadership, therefore, was both technical and psychological. It required confidence under pressure, decisiveness, and the ability to inspire calm and focus among men facing imminent death. The crew's survival often hinged on the pilot's capacity to merge instinct, experience, and authority into action. The survival of a bomber was often dictated by tactics as much as luck. Formation flying was not merely ceremonial, it was life or death. B-17s flew in tight boxes, overlapping fields of fire from gunners, creating a protective web that made single-plane attacks difficult for enemy fighters. Pilots adjusted altitude and heading in coordination with their squadron, constantly balancing offensive objectives against defensive safety. On missions where a bomber suffered catastrophic damage, tactical ingenuity became critical. A plane with a compromised tail or engine required delicate manipulation of throttle, rudder, and ailerons to maintain stability. Pilots improvised techniques like asymmetric engine power, careful banking, and speed adjustments to compensate for lost control surfaces. The goal was simple but harrowing: keep the aircraft aloft long enough to reach friendly territory. Tactical awareness also extended to evasion. Crews tracked enemy flak bursts and anticipated fighter attack vectors. Even small errors could magnify instability in a damaged bomber, potentially flipping it out of the sky. For a tailless B-17, these maneuvers were executed under extreme physical and psychological stress, each second a calculated gamble. Beyond machinery and maneuvering, the psychological dimension of bombing missions defined the crew's experience. Crews understood that missions were extraordinarily dangerous, with high casualty rates. Each sortie forced men to confront mortality in tangible ways: a neighbor hit by flak, an engine ablaze, or the sight of a wing twisting unnaturally. Moral courage was critical. Pilots and gunners faced a dual responsibility: to complete the mission and to protect the lives of their fellow crew members. A tailless bomber, limping through hostile skies, presented a moral imperative. Survival was not just personal, but collective. Decisions had to weigh risk versus reward, balancing the instinct to return home against the possibility of endangering others in formation. The stress of this moral calculus shaped every action aboard the plane. Fear was constant, yet it sharpened focus, compelling crews to act decisively, trust one another implicitly, and adapt to circumstances that would break lesser teams. The moral resilience of the crew, as much as the aircraft's engineering, contributed to the improbable survival of a plane that should not have returned. The story of a single tailless bomber is more than anecdote. It carries lessons for strategic planning. Every aircraft lost or saved affected bombing doctrine, crew morale, and future mission design. Engineers studied returned bombers meticulously, documenting damage patterns to improve armor placement, control redundancies, and flight manuals. Commanders incorporated these observations into training, emphasizing adaptability in the air. Survivals, particularly those as extraordinary as flying home without a tail, became symbols of resilience. They influenced morale on both sides. Allied crews were inspired, while the Luftwaffe and anti-aircraft commanders recognized the limits of their effectiveness. Over time, these experiences informed broader tactical adjustments, shaping the evolution of strategic bombing campaigns throughout 1943 and beyond. The narrative of the bomber that defied destruction extended beyond immediate military consequences. Among airmen, these events became lore, passed from veteran to rookie as cautionary tales and motivational stories. They underscored the valor required to endure the skies over Europe and the extraordinary reliability of American engineering. Photographs, after-action reports, and post-war memoirs preserve these episodes, embedding them in the collective memory of World War II aviation. They highlighted not just mechanical triumph, but human heroism and ingenuity under unimaginable stress. This cultural resonance ensured that the story of a B-17 returning home without a tail would be remembered long after the guns fell silent. January 17, 1943. The early morning fog hung low over the North Sea as the B-17 bomber, part of the 91st Bomb Group, climbed toward cruising altitude. The target, a German ball-bearing factory deep in northern Germany. It was a mission like countless others, yet few crews would survive with the outcome that awaited this particular aircraft. The bomber maintained formation, flak bursts lighting up the sky below like violent fireworks. Suddenly, a salvo detonated near the tail, sending a shudder through the fuselage. Metal screamed. Instruments rattled violently. The vertical stabilizer, the very appendage that gave the aircraft control, was shredded, leaving the plane yawing uncontrollably. Alarms blared in the cockpit. The pilot gritted his teeth, eyes scanning the horizon while his hands worked the throttles with precision born of instinct and hundreds of hours of training. Behind him, the crew reacted in synchronized urgency. The tail gunner reported heavy damage. The ball turret engineer noted flak holes perforating the fuselage. Smoke began to curl through the rear compartments, mingling with the acrid scent of hydraulic fluid. The navigator recalculated the flight path, accounting for the compromised aerodynamics. Every man understood the stakes. Without a tail, the bomber was effectively a glider in motion, subject to the capriciousness of wind and enemy fire. Enemy fighters circled, drawn to the crippled bomber. Messerschmitts dove from above, seeking the weakened control surfaces. The pilot, improvising with differential engine thrust, countered the plane's natural tendency to spin. Each adjustment was a gamble. A single miscalculation could send the aircraft into an unrecoverable dive. Crew members clung to their stations, muscles taut, adrenaline surging, aware that their survival depended as much on calm precision as on courage. The bombardier, normally focused on the target, monitored engine instruments and structural damage. The co-pilot assisted, making small corrections to compensate for the missing tail, guiding the aircraft like a mariner navigating treacherous waters. The engineers in the rear crawled through smoke-filled compartments, securing loose equipment that could compromise balance, their hands blackened by soot and oil. The aircraft groaned under every flak burst, a wounded giant refusing to collapse. Time stretched. Minutes became an eternity as the B-17 limped across hostile skies, fighting both physics and enemy aggression. Every flak salvo threatened to rip away what remained of the fuselage. Every evasive maneuver risked stalling the engines. And yet, against all probability, the bomber held together. The crew's cohesion, their training, instinct, and trust kept the aircraft airborne. At the midpoint of the mission, over German-occupied territory, another flak burst hit near the crippled tail. The aircraft yawed sharply, twisting dangerously. The pilot countered with asymmetric throttle adjustments and banked carefully to stabilize the glide. Sweat mixed with frost on his brow. The co-pilot's voice broke through the cockpit intercom. "Hold her steady, just a little further." The navigator calculated the remaining distance to Allied airspace. It was more than 200 miles over enemy-controlled terrain, each mile a gamble with death. Radio communication crackled with intermittent static. Other bombers in the formation had moved ahead or fallen back, leaving the crippled plane isolated. For the first time, the crew recognized the stark truth. They were entirely on their own. And yet, the B-17 responded. Its engines, though stressed and uneven, roared in defiance. The remaining control surfaces, small patches of stabilizer, and precise throttle management allowed the aircraft to maintain a tenuous equilibrium. Every crew member played a part in this improbable ballet of survival. Gunners scanning for fighters, engineers reinforcing weak points, pilots manipulating the damaged A-frame with almost surgical precision. The bomber continued, a wounded Leviathan battling against wind, gravity, and enemy fire. Moments of panic fled, alarms sounding, instruments flickering, but were quickly replaced by focus. Each second required deliberate action, each mile of victory against overwhelming odds. The world below seemed a hostile canvas, yet above it, a miracle of engineering and human will unfolded. This precarious balance set the stage for the final, decisive leg of the flight, the approach to Allied airspace. The crew knew the danger was far from over, but the first half of their journey had already transformed them from ordinary airmen into participants in a story of extraordinary courage and endurance. The bomber edged closer to the North Sea's edge, where Allied-controlled airspace began. Every mile brought a mix of relief and renewed tension. Enemy fighters still prowled the skies, sensing vulnerability. Flak batteries along the coast continued to send deadly shrapnel skyward, though their range and accuracy waned. The B-17, now stripped of its vertical stabilizer and most of the horizontal tail, was a test of physics and sheer determination. Pilots relied almost entirely on asymmetric engine thrust to stay. Each adjustment required delicate calculation. Too much power from one side and the aircraft could spin. Too little and it would yaw uncontrollably. The co-pilot monitored fuel consumption meticulously, knowing that one engine failure could be catastrophic. Small, seemingly insignificant corrections became the difference between life and death. Inside, the crew moved like parts of a single organism. The bombardier, traditionally focused on target calculations, assisted with navigation, referencing landmarks visible through shattered plexiglass. Engineers in the rear crawled through debris, securing loose equipment that threatened to destabilize the aircraft. Gunners maintained vigilance, aware that enemy fighters could appear at any moment, exploiting the bomber's compromised state. Fear was constant, but it sharpened focus rather than paralyzing action. As the coastline appeared, the pilot's hands shook slightly from cold and adrenaline, yet his precision never faltered. The aircraft had taken on water from frost and ice, adding weight to an already strained airframe. Instruments flickered intermittently, and alarms sounded from damaged hydraulics. Yet the B-17 remained aloft, defying both expectation and the natural order. The final test came with the approach to the Allied airfield. Landing a plane with a functioning tail is a challenge. landing one without is almost unimaginable. The pilot reduced altitude cautiously, balancing speed with control. The bomber wobbled, responding sluggishly to rudder input, threatening to tip with every correction. Ground crews, alerted to the aircraft's condition, prepared for the worst, but they too watched in astonishment as the flying fortress approached. Inside, the crew held their collective breath. Each movement of the throttle, each small adjustment of the control surfaces, demanded absolute precision. The co-pilot called out minor corrections, their voices steady but urgent. The bombardier checked final approach angles while gunners braced themselves. Smoke from damaged hydraulics curled into the cockpit, mingling with the bitter tang of fear and determination. As the runway neared, the aircraft began its descent. A gust of wind threatened to tip the bomber, but careful throttle modulation and slight aileron corrections kept it level. The wheels touched the tarmac, bouncing slightly but holding. Metal groaned under the uneven stress, yet the flying fortress continued its roll. Dust, frost, and exhaust smoke swirled as it slowed, coming to a complete stop almost 3 minutes after initial touchdown. Silence followed, a charged pause broken only by the groan of stressed metal and the distant hum of other aircraft. Then, a collective exhale. Crew members unclipped themselves, their legs numb from hours of tension, frostbite, and exhaustion. Tears mixed with soot-on faces, smiles uncertain but triumphant. Every man knew the improbability of their survival. The bomber, battered and broken, had defied physics, engineering limits, and enemy fire to bring them home. The significance of the flight went beyond the survival of the crew. Engineers immediately assessed the aircraft, documenting the extensive damage for future lessons in design resilience. Commanders debriefed the crew, analyzing their improvised maneuvers and decision-making under extreme stress. This single mission became a reference point for both tactical manuals and morale-building stories. The surviving bomber was not just a machine. It was a symbol, proof of what human skill, courage, and determination could achieve when coupled with robust engineering. In the days following, the story spread among squadrons, reaching crews preparing for their own missions. The lesson was clear: even in the face of overwhelming damage, disciplined action, teamwork, and ingenuity could tip the balance toward survival. For historians, engineers, and airmen alike, this tailless flight became a defining example of the resilience and heroism that characterized the air war over Europe. The moment the B-17 came to a stop on the tarmac, the full weight of what had just occurred settled over the crew. Relief mingled with disbelief. Mechanics and ground personnel rushed forward, inspecting the battered airframe. The tail, once a vital stabilizing structure, was gone. Panels were shredded, control surfaces mangled, and flak scars crisscrossed the fuselage. Yet the bomber had landed safely, a testament to the combined skill of its crew and the robustness of Boeing's engineering. Medical teams attended immediately, checking for frostbite, shock, and minor injuries. Several crew members were physically exhausted, their hands raw from gripping controls and shoveling snow and ice that had accumulated on the fuselage. Psychologically, however, the crew faced a different kind of assessment: gratitude, pride, and the sobering understanding of their mortality. Each man knew that without precise coordination, unbroken focus, and a measure of luck, the flight could have ended hundreds of miles over the North Sea. Engineers began a meticulous examination of the aircraft, documenting the damage through intelligence reports and design analysis. Every puncture, every tear in the fuselage was catalogued. Lessons learned from such flights informed adjustments in armor placement, control redundancy, and damage assessment protocols. The survival of a B-17 stripped of its tail was almost unprecedented, providing valuable data for both ongoing production and crew training. Manuals and flight briefings would later reference the flight as an example of extreme handling and emergency procedure under catastrophic damage. The squadron commander convened a debriefing. Crew members recounted every flak burst, evasive maneuver, and improvisation. Their reports were precise: which engines faulted first, how throttle adjustments stabilized you, how the crew maintained situational awareness despite structural compromise. The story became both tactical and inspirational. Instructors later used this account to teach pilots how to manage extreme damage, emphasizing communication, decision-making, and calm under pressure. Recognition followed. Medals and commendations were awarded for valor under extraordinary circumstances. While these honors carried prestige, the crew valued survival above all. They became a living example of what could be accomplished with courage, training, and cohesion. Fellow airmen studied their tactics and approach, seeking insights into the handling of crippled aircraft. The event reinforced a critical lesson. The line between disaster and triumph often depended on skill, adaptability, and collective effort rather than luck alone. Beyond the immediate squadron, the story of the tailless B-17 spread across bases and eventually into wider military reports. Pilots, navigators, and gunners absorbed its lessons. Engineers incorporated observations into designs for future aircraft, testing modifications in control surfaces, engine management systems, and damage-resistant structures. Strategic planners recognized the morale value of such survivals. In a war of attrition and constant danger, tales of triumph inspired crews facing similar risks daily. Yet the aftermath also underscored the cost of air campaigns. Other bombers on the same mission had not been as fortunate. Losses reminded crews of the brutal calculus of strategic bombing. High-risk missions exacted a heavy toll. For every miraculous survival, many others perished, a stark reminder of the stakes and the randomness of war. This convergence of triumph and loss set the stage for the second section of Aftermath, which will explore the broader implications, long-term impacts on bomber tactics, crew morale, and the evolution of air strategy that extended well beyond a single aircraft or mission. In the weeks following the mission, the survival of the tailless B-17 resonated throughout the Allied air forces. Crews across bomber groups shared the story, not just as a testament to courage, but as a case study in engineering, tactics, and adaptability. Training protocols were adjusted, incorporating lessons from the flight. Pilots learned to manage aircraft under extreme damage. Engineers refined emergency procedures, and gunners were reminded that vigilance, even when the odds seemed insurmountable, could save lives. Strategically, the mission influenced the way bomber operations were planned. Commanders began to appreciate the limits and resilience of their aircraft more deeply. The robustness of the B-17 allowed for riskier, higher-reward sorties, knowing that even partially crippled planes could sometimes return home. Conversely, intelligence reports on Luftwaffe tactics were scrutinized to identify vulnerabilities and improve formation strategies. The flight highlighted a paradox of the air war. Mechanical failure or enemy attack might devastate a mission, yet the skill and resolve of a trained crew could turn near certain loss into improbable survival. The psychological impact on bomber crews cannot be overstated. Stories of return from seemingly hopeless conditions became part of the shared culture of the Air Force. Young airmen, facing the terrifying reality of flak, enemy fighters, and freezing altitudes, found inspiration in the success of this one crew. It reinforced the belief that training, coordination, and courage could sometimes bend fate itself. Morale, often fragile in long, perilous campaigns, received a tangible boost. Tales of survival like this one were recounted in mess halls, briefing rooms, and letters home, creating a legacy of resilience. Meanwhile, engineers continued to analyze the aircraft. The damage pattern of the missing tail offered invaluable data. Modifications to control surfaces, flight manuals, and emergency protocols were tested and implemented. Designers understood that while total structural loss was nearly fatal, partial compromises could be managed with proper training and handling techniques. This insight influenced subsequent production models and the ongoing evolution of bomber design. Lessons from this mission informed improvements in durability, redundancy, and emergency response measures that saved countless lives in later operations. The flight also underscored the delicate balance between risk and reward in strategic bombing. Commanders realized that while aircraft could endure extreme damage, every sortie carried high stakes. Each crew's survival depended on precise coordination and split-second decision-making. The narrative of the tailless B-17 became a symbol not just of triumph, but of the harsh reality of air warfare, a reminder that engineering marvels and human courage were constantly tested against the brutal logic of combat. Finally, the cultural and historical impact of the mission extended far beyond the airfield. Memoirs, after-action reports, and archival photographs preserved the story, creating a tangible record of heroism under extreme conditions. It became emblematic of the air war over Europe. The deadly environment, the courage of young crews, and the resilience of machines designed to endure what seemed impossible. The bomber itself, repaired and returned to service, carried the legacy forward, a flying monument to innovation, bravery, and the indomitable will to survive. The story of the B-17 that flew home without a tail is more than a tale of survival. It is a testament to human courage, ingenuity, and resilience. In the unforgiving skies over Europe, where metal and men alike were tested to their limits, this single mission captured the essence of what it meant to endure under impossible conditions. Every element, the engineering of the flying fortress, the precise coordination of the crew, the unpredictable threats of enemy fire, combined in a fleeting moment where human skill and mechanical design converged to defy expectation. The aircraft, though grievously damaged, responded to careful hands and steadfast minds. It became both a symbol and a lesson. Resilience is forged not only in the factory or in design manuals, but in the split-second decisions of those who dare to act under extreme pressure. For history, the mission highlights the evolving interplay between technology and warfare. Engineers refined aircraft designs, commanders reconsidered tactics, and crews internalized lessons in adaptability. The survival of a tailless bomber provided data that shaped subsequent operations and saved lives in the countless missions that followed. It demonstrated that the edge of human possibility is not static. It expands when courage meets innovation. Yet beyond strategy and mechanics, the story resonates on a profoundly human level. Faith, hope, determination, and trust were as critical as engines or control surfaces. The crew's unwavering focus under extraordinary stress illuminates the intangible qualities that define heroism, not bravado, but disciplined, selfless action in the face of overwhelming danger. Ultimately, the flight serves as a reminder of the fragility and resilience of life in war. One machine, one crew, one mission, a convergence of circumstance and choice, can leave a legacy far greater than its immediate tactical significance. In the annals of World War II, this event stands as both a marvel of engineering and a monument to the human spirit, enduring as a story of survival, ingenuity, and the extraordinary courage of those who faced the skies with resolve.